Ray Charles, music legend, genius, pianist, and the voice behind timeless hits, was known for his soulful melodies and fierce independence. But behind those signature sunglasses and charming smile was a man who didn't shy away from calling things as he saw them. While Ray mostly stayed out of Hollywood drama, there were a few actors he reportedly couldn't stand, whether it was due to disrespect, arrogance, or a lack of authenticity. These individuals left a bitter note in the maestro's memory. Curious to know who managed to upset a legend like Ray Charles? Let's dive into the 6 actors he allegedly disliked most. Ray Charles Robinson was born on September 23, 1930, in Albany, Georgia. But he was raised in the small town of Greenville, Florida. His life was shaped by hardship from the very beginning. His family was poor, and tragedy struck early when Ray witnessed the drowning death of his younger brother at the age of 5. Not long after, Ray began to lose his eyesight due to glaucoma, becoming completely blind by the age of 7. Despite this, his mother, Aretha Robinson, was a powerful force in his life. She pushed him to be independent and self-sufficient, refusing to let his blindness define his future. Ray attended the Florida School for the Deaf and the Blind in St. Augustine, where he learned to read, write, and compose music in Braille. There, he mastered classical music, but was deeply drawn to jazz, blues, and gospel. After his mother passed when he was 15, Ray left school and began his journey as a professional musician. He developed a unique blend of musical styles that fused gospel, blues, jazz, and country, eventually becoming a pioneer of soul music. His raw voice, brilliant piano skills, and fearless songwriting brought him fame, but his fiery spirit and sharp opinions also made him stand apart. Ray wasn't just a musician, he was a man who spoke his truth, even when it ruffled feathers. Actor 1 Ray Charles had a deep respect for authenticity both in music and in people. That's why his reported disdain for Clint Eastwood came as a surprise to many. On the surface, Eastwood, with his rugged charm and tough on-screen persona, seemed like someone Ray might admire. But behind closed doors, Ray saw something different. He believed Eastwood represented the kind of Hollywood ego that looked down on musicians, especially black artists, unless they were useful for soundtracks or public image. Their tension reportedly began during a charity event in the early 80s, where Ray noticed Eastwood's dismissive behavior toward the performers, allegedly calling the music segment background noise. Ray, already a legend by then, didn't take kindly to being reduced to a sideshow, though they never clashed publicly. Ray is said to have voiced his opinions to close friends and fellow musicians, calling Clint cold, calculating, and the kind of man who walks into a room and sucks all the warmth out. He also disapproved of the way Eastwood handled race in some of his earlier films, feeling that the actor-director avoided real conversations in favor of keeping his clean cowboy image. For Ray Charles, who fought for civil rights and stood up against segregation, even when it cost him gigs and money, this kind of silence wasn't just cowardice, it was complicity. While Eastwood may have been a hero on the silver screen, to Ray, he lacked the soul and courage that defined real heroes. Their paths rarely crossed after that event, but the impression was permanent. Ray didn't need confrontation to draw a line. His silence and avoidance said more than words ever could. And in his private list of actors he couldn't stand, Clint Eastwood reportedly stood near the very top. Actor 2, Ray Charles and Frank Sinatra, 2 towering legends in American music, should have been allies. Both revolutionized their genres, battled inner demons, and performed for presidents. But according to those close to Ray, he carried a quiet resentment toward Sinatra that went deeper than showbiz rivalry. At the heart of it was an uneasy combination of admiration and distrust. Ray respected Sinatra's vocal control and charisma, but he never forgot how Frank's circle treated black musicians during the swing era. While Sinatra publicly supported civil rights later in life, Ray believed much of it was for optics, not conviction. One specific incident in the late 60s seemed to seal Ray's opinion. At a Hollywood fundraiser, Ray was invited to perform. Sinatra was headlining the event and, according to witnesses, made a casual but loaded remark about keeping the blues guys in check after Charles ran over time by just a few minutes. Though it may have been meant as a joke, Ray didn't laugh. To a man who fought tooth and nail for dignity in a white-dominated industry, comments like that reopened old wounds. Ray also disliked what he saw as Sinatra's Godfather complex, that need to be worshipped in every room. He found it disingenuous when Frank offered praise in public, but rarely collaborated with black musicians outside orchestrated events. To Ray, that felt like performative solidarity. Behind his ever-present shades, Ray could see through what he called cigar smoke diplomacy, the handshakes, smiles, and toasts that masked deeper biases. Though Ray never directly attacked Sinatra in the media, insiders say he once told a fellow musician, "Frank sings about pain, but he never had to live it like we did." That quiet indictment said it all. For Ray Charles, respect wasn't earned with charm, it came from struggle and truth. Actor 3 Ray Charles had little patience for people who rode the coattails of others, and that's exactly how he saw Jim Belushi. While the world often viewed Jim as the goofy younger brother of the legendary John Belushi, Ray wasn't impressed by his legacy or his attitude. According to musicians and insiders who worked on film soundtracks in the late 80s, Ray once referred to Jim as a shadow, pretending to shine. It wasn't just about talent, it was about behavior. Ray reportedly saw Jim as disrespectful, especially in spaces where black artists were contributing serious work and Belushi was cracking jokes or not taking rehearsals seriously. One incident, during a charity recording session, allegedly left a lasting impression. Ray had agreed to lend his voice to a blues track for a film project. Jim Belushi was part of the same project, brought in more for his Saturday Night Live name than musical skill. During the session, Jim reportedly mocked the blues genre, with exaggerated dance moves and off-key humming, which may have played for laughs on stage, but struck Ray as mockery, not tribute. Ray, ever protective of the blues, as a sacred art form born from real pain, saw it as a line crossed. He was also unimpressed by how Jim would invoke his brother's name in conversations, as if legacy alone earned him a seat at the table. Ray once commented to a fellow musician, "The blues doesn't care who your brother was. You either lived it or you didn't." That was the core of his disapproval. Ray didn't mind laughter, but he demanded respect, and for him, Jim Belushi represented a kind of Hollywood carelessness that diluted the soul of music with slapstick and ego. Actor for 2, most of the world. Marlon Brando was a genius on-acting titan who redefined cinema with raw emotion and fierce commitment. But to Ray Charles, brilliance wasn't enough if it came without accountability. Ray admired Brando's performances, but reportedly distrusted the man behind the roles. Their interactions were rare, but what Ray heard and observed was enough to put Brando firmly on his list of people to avoid. One of the main reasons, Brando's erratic behavior and his tendency to champion causes only when it suited his image. In the early 1970s, Brando famously refused his Oscar in protest of Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans. Many applauded the gesture, but Ray, who had been on the front lines of the civil rights movement and personally boycotted segregated venues, saw Brando's act as theatrical, symbolic, yes, but hollow, without real follow-through. "One speech don't make you a soldier," Ray allegedly told a friend. What bothered him more was Brando's ability to float between controversy and praise, without enduring the lasting consequences that black artists faced daily. Ray also disliked Brando's reputation for being difficult and unpredictable on set, believing that kind of behavior was tolerated only because of race and status. To Ray, who had to fight for every ounce of control over his music, Brando's antics felt like indulgence privilege disguised as passion at a private industry event. Brando reportedly tried to strike up a conversation with Ray about jazz. According to someone who witnessed it, Ray responded with a polite nod, then turned away, later saying, "He plays roles. I play life." That subtle line summed up Ray's view. He respected realness, and to him, Brando's world of masks and method acting was a performance he didn't have time for. Actor 5. Ray Charles had a sharp ear for music, and an even sharper instinct for people. And when it came to Chevy Chase, the verdict came quickly: arrogant, dismissive, and, in Ray's words, too loud to listen. While Chevy Chase was beloved by many for his comedic genius during the early days of Saturday Night Live, Ray reportedly found him abrasive and tone-deaf when it came to race, respect, and cultural boundaries. Their paths crossed during a televised variety show in the early 80s, where both were invited as guests. According to crew members, Chevy made a poorly timed joke about Ray's blindness, intending it to be humorous in the spirit of live comedy, but the joke didn't land. Ray remained calm on camera, but was reportedly furious afterward. He didn't mind a good laugh, even at his own expense, but he drew the line at what he called ignorance, masquerading as wit. Chevy's reputation for being difficult and disrespectful to colleagues only reinforced Ray's opinion. He viewed Chevy as a man who leaned on privilege to get away with rudeness, and who lacked the humility that Ray considered essential to great artistry. In one private conversation, Ray allegedly remarked, "He thinks the world's a punchline, but not every story is his to tell." What bothered Ray even more was Chevy's tendency to dominate spaces, talking over others and failing to recognize the value of voices different from his own. For a man like Ray, who built a career on really listening to every beat, every note, every silence, that kind of energy felt toxic. And so, while many in Hollywood laughed along with Chevy Chase, Ray Charles simply turned the volume down and never looked back. Actor 6 Jerry Lewis was a towering figure in comedy, wild, expressive, and unapologetically over the top. But to Ray Charles, he was also the embodiment of everything Ray disliked about old Hollywood: loud, patronizing, and often blind to the deeper weight of the cultural moment. Though both men were icons in their own right, Ray reportedly viewed Jerry as someone who used comedy not to uplift, but to dominate, often at the expense of others' dignity. Their clash wasn't personal, it was philosophical. What really soured Ray's opinion was Jerry's notorious habit of leaning into offensive stereotypes during his routines, whether mocking physical disabilities or slipping into exaggerated accents. Jerry's humor often crossed lines that Ray, a man who lived through segregation and real pain, found hard to forgive. It wasn't just insensitive, it was, in Ray's words, cheap laughter at heavy cost. Their most awkward encounter happened during a televised telethon for muscular dystrophy, which Lewis famously hosted for decades. Ray had been invited as a performer. Backstage, Lewis reportedly greeted Ray with a loud, exaggerated imitation of a blind man tapping a cane, intending it as comedy. Ray didn't laugh. He performed his set with grace and soul, then left quietly, refusing any future invitations. What struck Ray most was Jerry's apparent inability to evolve. As society changed, Lewis doubled down on his old-school persona, dismissing modern sensibilities as too sensitive. But Ray saw it differently. "If the world's growing," he once said, "and you're standing still, you're moving backward." Jerry Lewis, for all his success, represented a kind of careless cruelty that Ray simply couldn't tolerate. To him, laughter was sacred, meant to connect, not to belittle. And in that divide, Jerry Lewis became another name on the list of stars Ray Charles wished had a little more soul.